Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today we will hear from federal topic experts on the reasons to migrate to the cloud, common migration experiences, and the benefits that cloud migration can bring. My name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration and technology modernization initiatives. I would like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise team for partnering with us on today's webinar. Before we begin, I just want to encourage our audience to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. Also, remember, if you would like to receive your CPE credit, you must answer all three of the poll questions as they come up throughout today's discussion. And on that note, I would like to go ahead and begin introductions of our panelists. If our panelists could come, please come on camera now. I see Bill, hello there. There we go, there's the rest of them. All right, excellent. So if you could please share with us who you are, what agency you're with, what role you play there, and anything else that you'd like to share with our audience up top. Now would be the time. Bill, I saw you first, so let's go with you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to talk. So I am Bill Burnham. I am the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Public Sector CTO. Chief Technology Officer, and in that role, I'm about an inch deep and a mile wide, covering all forms of public sector, from federal government, intel agencies, Department of Defense, all down into state and local government, higher education, all about kind of long-term strategy, dealing with senior level engagements. I joined HPE about 3 years ago, coming out of the federal sector as a CTO. I was the Chief Technology Officer for Special Operations Command in the Department of Defense for 7 years, from 2011 to 2018. And in that role, worried about everything from the cloud first policy that came out, enabling that all the way down to operator worn kit. And prior to that, I retired out of the Army in 2011, having done active duty time for a career. So a lot of federal time, and I talk a lot of times from that perspective, but I do have now 3+ years on the private sector trying to help digital modernization happen in the federal space. So I look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. And then next we'll hear from Casey.
Hi, good afternoon. I am the Chief Architect for DISC, the Digital Infrastructure Service Center at USDA. We're a shared services provider for federal agencies and within the department itself. So I, much like Bill, inch deep, mile wide kind of thing. We have 29 independent agencies and focused into 8 mission areas. So we have a very different perspective of kind of what it means for the Department of Agriculture. And I look forward to the discussion today and sharing anything we can.
Thank you. And then over to Ryan next.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Korn. I am the Senior Cloud Architect and Program Manager for Data Solutions at the Bureau of Industry and Security, a tiny, but mighty bureau in the Department of Commerce. I think I'll be able to provide more of a on-the-ground focused perspective. I think that'll be really helpful for the discussion as well. I just joined BIS a number of months ago, 3 months ago, focused on supporting 3 big initiatives. Migrating our existing applications and infrastructure to the cloud, using cloud services to free up our data for business users for reporting and other purposes, and also rebuilding our applications using modern low-code, no-code tools. So I'm really happy to be here and excited for the conversation with you all.
Thank you, Ryan. And then over to Brian.
Hi, good day, everyone. Yes, Brian Merrick. I'm the director of our cloud program office in Department of State. So really, in this role, we provide enterprise cloud solutions to all of our department customers. Over 275 posts and 110,000 users and multiple bureaus, and we do have a multi-cloud environment as well. So we're really kind of working that shared service provider, shared responsibility model in approaching this in a very federated environment. I've been connected with the move to the cloud and IT modernization since I think around the time FedRAMP started. So it's been a long journey. definitely a lot of interesting stories to tell and lessons learned. And as we approach it from both the platform layer and also the application layer, and trying to help our customers meet their mission.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. So our topic of discussion, again, is accelerating cloud modernization through migration within the federal government. And some of the things that we're going to discuss are lessons learned, challenges, solutions that you've implemented to overcome those challenges. And if we have time, we'll even maybe discuss sort of like how to begin, like what advice would you give to people who are beginning their journey? And we have quite a few people online. So again, to the audience, really want to encourage you, send your questions in as they come up throughout the discussion, and we'll make sure to prioritize those. But maybe just to kick things off, like we can talk about what the acceleration of cloud modernization within your own agency or organization has looked like. Just an overview of where you were in your journey and where you are, where you hope to be. Could you start us off with that? What that might look like? We'll begin with Ryan, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually at the beginning of our cloud modernization journey. Our new CIO came in about 1.5 years ago, and has been really rebuilding the organization in a lot of different ways. The fact is that we are currently, as I said, doing several different things, moving our infrastructure, applications, rebuilding them, as well as freeing up our data. So a lot of this has been in the form of pilots, small initiatives, getting things started, getting the documentation together, building the team. Some things have worked and some things haven't worked. And now we're in the phase of actually hitting the gas and moving ahead with full scale efforts after getting some of the initial environments stood up. So happy to share more about how we've gotten on the road. I think this is probably the best metaphor to use. And now, what the game plan is to continue driving it forward.
Well, thank you for that. And then Brian, I would like to hear from you on that next.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting journey. I think different sectors of our agency approach it a little differently. For the most part, our business units really moved out first because of the exigent need to have business outcomes. And so they got in the cloud first. And I think the infrastructure community was a little slower to adopt. As you can imagine, I mean, the daunting cost and complexity and kind of wrapping their heads around that, it took some time. Now we're at the point where the enterprise, if you will, has seen the value of this. And now at the enterprise level, we're providing a lot of those infrastructure services that are now helping the businesses accelerate beyond what they could do in small teams. As we're all competing for the same talent pools, there's still the same cost pressures. Cloud is not cheap. But you can do quite a bit with it. So as we've kind of matured this model, it really has moved at the pace of the business units that had the largest need for the cloud. And in approaching that, what we try to do is really, instead of looking at like a typical, say, tech refresh approach, was really to fasten on, the highest yield business outcomes. So those activities that would garner budget interest, that they also had a significant impact. And even if we could incrementally improve them, that was still a market improvement over what they had initially. And so by fastening on to some of those different portfolios, it really created the buzz. And now things have really taken off in the last couple of years, with COVID and everyone being remote. What we're really seeing now is a move towards, speed of decision. So decision support, use of data, workflow tools to replace email, mobility, and people being able to work anywhere. And really being able to do your work through forms and data and movement of data at speed all around the world. So it's really an exciting time, and we're now starting to get into more analytics outcomes and more higher level activities. So we're really seeing a huge burgeoning of that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And Casey, what's it been looking like over at USDA?
Well, it sounds like Brian's experience has been very similar. We had an early adoption and a high adoption in a very federated fashion. So we have a lot of duplication because every program has very similar needs, but their business outcomes drove them to deploy their infrastructure to fit their purpose. And what we've had to do now is kind of focus our strengths back into removing the duplication and increasing the enablement so they can continue to move faster forward without duplicating these services across, in my case, 29 agencies, 5 different hyperscalers. It's a lot of repetition and reuse that we can drive down our costs and increase our ability to meet these new technology needs. And then compliance with all the cyber EOs has definitely made that a fun experience in the last year.
Yep. And Bill, I know you have your own unique experience coming from government. Now you've got your industry hat on. So whatever of that you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think, similar has been said in what Brian mentioned, it's been a long journey. And if we recognize that what we're talking about with, I'll use air quotes, cloud, and how that definition has been matured over time, right? In 2006, frankly, AWS introduced us to this idea of a virtual server where for X amount of pennies an hour, they would give you a virtual server. And that's how infrastructure as a service became known as a cloud style of computing. And it still is today. But that predates Docker containers and Kubernetes and all this stuff that's become known as cloud technology. And, I think Ryan mentioned it, what's now the digital modernization is everything from, sure, I get better efficiencies for a certain workload by moving my virtual machine into a hyperscaler's infrastructure. Sometimes that makes sense. But a lot of the drive now is to look and act like some of our cloud native private sector entities, like we all can get on a Google or a Facebook and they all want that personal self-service, which means we're driving towards containerization, application rationalization, and stuff Ryan's talking about. That's where it gets hard. That's where there's a lot of talent debt, technical debt, where we don't have a lot of folks that just writ large across the industry that really is steeped in writing things in Go and Python and refactoring applications. But what I've watched, having now been a government guy forever and now on this side of the house, I mean, federal policy is getting very bore-sighted on rationalizing applications, right? I was part of the cloud first policy guys and forklifting VMs just, because we were told to, straight up. That's what we were supposed to do. And there's been a lot of lessons learned from that, and a lot of the vector and direction and where we were moving before I left government, and now where I'm getting pulled in is helping to strategize around how do we do application rationalization, how do we refactor our monolithic applications into containers so that they are first run citizens in the hyperscalers. I mean, cloud now is looked at as a style of computing, not a location to compute. You should have cloud on-prem, you should have cloud at the edge, you should have certainly cloud able to run in your hyperscaler environment. So now digital modernization that we're getting pulled into as a private sector company, but also in helping government entities, is a lot about how do we modernize our workloads so that they can exist in a cloud environment writ large. So hybrid cloud, hybrid multi-cloud, Brian mentioned multi-cloud. Hybrid multi-cloud is the nirvana folks are going after.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives with us. We're going to take a quick break from questions and pop up our first poll question of the day. We could get that up. There we go. Katie, you're fast. All right. How familiar are you with your agency's cloud migration strategies? So please take a moment at home and answer that if you'd like to receive your CPE credit for attending today's event. Let's dive a little bit more into lessons learned before we finish this part of the discussion. Ryan, I would like to hear from you first on some of the major lessons you have learned while making the shift to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few, and many of these are, I think, hard-won lessons. And I would say, for folks on the line, there's really no substitute for experience and having gone through these things yourself. You can hear about us talk about things that we've done or in theory, but until you've gone through it, it really opens your eyes. And that was my perspective, very experiential. I think the first big thing is having a shared values-driven vision and making sure that everybody has bought into that vision. Everybody's had an opportunity to participate in shaping that vision. I think there's sort of two components to that. The first component is obviously the technical vision, which is to say, like, why are you moving to the cloud, right? And what are you attempting to do? As Bill was mentioning, there are so many different possibilities because it's a style of computing. Our goal is to migrate all of our workloads to the cloud. That's where we're at. But that is taking many different forms, right? It's our existing infrastructure, it's new applications, it's SaaS solutions that everybody can use in the business units, not just us, right? on the tech side. So I think knowing why you're going from a technical perspective is important, but then equally important is knowing why you're going from a business perspective. And I think those two inform each other. If it's just, a colleague of mine used to say that whatever the technology thing was of the discussion was, it can't be a self-licking ice cream cone. And I just thought that was a really great way to describe it. Like, it's not just for its own sake. Like, there is a reason for doing it that has to be driven by the business. So that vision, I think, is one big thing. The second thing is finding good partners to execute that vision. I think partnership is probably the most important thing, even beyond the strategy. The reason being is that, talent is at a premium, but it's not just about bringing in people, it's about finding people who are already there, right? And can join your team and be a part of that shared vision. So whether it's internal federal staff, contractors, the vendors who are making the products, because there's always going to be a question about how do I use this thing, or does it have this capability, right? And then also, of course, your internal stakeholders. I think until you build that culture of partnership, nothing's going to go where you want it to, and it's not going to be as long lasting as you would want it to be. So that's a huge one for me. And then the last thing is, I feel really strongly about this too, is knowing your tech stack's capabilities and what it's designed to do. Whatever product you go with, whatever solution, you want to have an understanding of how it works, how it doesn't work. Read the documentation. I find myself reading that all the time, and that it's kind of dry, but it helps a lot in being able to explain to folks like, hey, we actually can do it this way instead of that way, and this is cheaper or faster, or let's get into this new mindset. You can use some low code, no code tools to build things really quickly, than much more quickly than you could have done years ago, for example. But at the same time, it requires a different way of thinking. You don't want to rebuild the same exact database that you built 20 years ago. You want to leverage a tool set because it abstracts some of that, right? So I think sometimes the devil can be in the details, and it's important to have that understanding of the nuances of each capability. But overall, yeah, I think vision, partners, and understanding the capabilities are going to be key.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ryan. And now, Brian, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's a main lesson learned that you've experienced?
Yeah, wow, there are so many. Yeah, I mean, I have to echo everything Ryan said. I mean, he's spot on. It's all those things and more. I think the biggest thing that we lose sight of on the IT side is that this whole effort really becomes a massive change management exercise. And so you have to look beyond just the technical side of it. You have to understand that since really the technology operates completely differently than most on-prem substantiations and environments and methods, you've really got to look at how you change holistically. So all your enablers for delivering IT, your policy, security policy has to adjust. The way you monitor, the way you do compliance. Your procurements have to adjust. You have to make sure that your contracting officers understand the difference between consumption-based pricing and license-based pricing, and how to optimize those agreements. Because really, we end up making technical architectural decisions often based more on how we can buy it than the actual capability of the tool. It has a significant impact. Understanding how to budget for consumption-based costing versus licensing. Certainly on the talent side, that is huge. I mean, one thing I've seen fail quite often is when an organization will try to deliver new technology in an old way. It just doesn't really work well. Really understanding how to move into a true agile capability and an agile structure. Like for us, we use a topology teams structure for enablement delivery teams. It changes everything. Even our infrastructure folks do that, and it changes risk tolerance. It changes the way people look at doing work. And so as you're delivering that technology, it just naturally brings even your infrastructure folks closer to the business, because you're interacting with those end users and those customers more rapidly and more often. And having, just like Ryan was saying, those really close relationships with the business, absolutely critical. Because if you don't understand your data, you really can't make risk-based decisions, and you can't find the right solution to fix the problem. And I think overarching to all these things is you go through all these tactical things, really settling on what is the problem you're trying to solve at each step of the way. Because oftentimes we'll have a different view of that technical problem than maybe the business does. And making sure that everybody's aligned to that is really going to save a lot of challenges you work through these changes.
Excellent. Thank you both for sharing that with us. And I do see we have a few audience questions come in. We'll definitely get to those momentarily. But before we continue, I just want to make sure I give Bill and Casey the floor if there's anything they would like to comment on or respond to that same question if they'd like.
I think they've hit it. I think, you know, my experience trying to affect change in the government, as we all understand, is one of the biggest things, and Ryan hit on, is culture, right? If you don't bring your people with you, there's going to be an appearance of disenfranchisement. You have server people now, and you have storage people now, and you have network people now, and there will be some who are threatened by the idea that I am moving to a Kubernetes-based environment that doesn't require storage, network, and server people anymore, right? So whether that's on premise, whether that's in a hyperscaler, whether it doesn't, you're changing, and so you have got to bring your workforce with you, because that workforce can absolutely derail your project. They have the power to make you fail. So there's this element where you can't move out smartly with a great plan if you haven't figured out how to bring your workforce with you. That was one of my biggest lessons learned in trying to affect change. Yes, you got to pick your language. Yes, you got to identify which workloads should run where and which can be containerized, but you have to start with your workforce. And in the federal government, we have contracted workforces, and those CLINs were written 5 years ago. So if they don't say Kubernetes in them, you know, you got to find a way of getting that workforce to come with you. That was a significant challenge that you face in the federal government, for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Casey, I think you're speaking, but you're on mute. If you
no, I was just nodding to what Bill was saying, but the USDA's kind of had all these same situations, and we've actually developed a cloud working group at the department level with all our partners, so we can revise cloud strategy, cloud policy, and cloud acquisitions, so we can answer the people in the process, so we can start enabling technology in the future. And that's really what we're trying to do, is build that enabling system so we can adopt the things that we need to just in time, because that's what the customers demand at this point.
Absolutely. All right, well, panelists, I do want to direct your attention towards, we have about 5 audience questions that have come through, and we'll start with the first one that came in at 1:46. So please just take a moment to read through those. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask if we could please pop up our second poll question for the panel. There we go. So, audience at home, in your opinion, what is the biggest barrier to migrating to the cloud? And your options include short-term targets, incompatibility with traditional network security tools, compliance concerns, data loss and leakage risks, organizational culture, lack of human resources, or other. And then we'll go ahead and put those results up once we get enough responses in. And we'll go back to audience questions. So our panelists, if you want to respond to the question I'm about to read, go ahead and take yourself off mute so that I know that you would like to respond. And if nobody goes off mute, maybe we'll come back to it later. But the first one is, what and where are the main data and access security challenges? And it looks like a follow-up included, and do you see operational and security advantages in hybrid versus cloud, full cloud implementations? So Brian, looks like you're the first one off mute. I'm going to call on you first.
Yeah, no, we've been running into this problem fast. We're doing quite a lot of enterprise crisis management work. As you can imagine everything going on in the world right now. And so really what that's done is driven an accelerated rate of breaking down those data silos. But with that, from a technical perspective, it's created some real complexity in the space. So now we have, for almost all of our solution sets, we end up with hybrid environments. So by that, in our context, generally, we'll have some on-prem data, and then we may have an APaaS or a SaaS solution for the facing. And then we'll also have an IaaS environment for analytics and other analytics tools. So for the end-to-end solution, we can have multiple moving parts. With that, we're also we do a lot of interagency work. We're also moving data between multiple organizations. And in the middle of that, especially in a lot of the activities we've been doing, a lot of that data transforms legally in terms of status of who can view that data, the different parameters around data storage and security requirements. So it's an ever evolving challenge. And I think what's really coming into play now is that speed to market and the ability to connect the dots on these things technically through use of APIs, obviously, and other techniques. But now we're confronted with these very real policy challenges of how do we provide the right security at the right time. A lot of the arrows in the quiver are obviously encryption, but if you work with folks outside your environment and need to share data, that's a challenge. Also, identity and data ownership, that's a real challenge running into in these sort of shared data environments, if you will. Sometimes there isn't one specific data owner for a multilateral effort. So having to identify who has that release authority, who can make those decisions on risk, what are the policies and parameters around it, and then how do I make sure that I'm using role-based access controls at the application layer to manage who has access to what data, and then how do I ensure that I'm enforcing the right level of security controls around the different environments at different points in time that you have that. And then as you're moving that data, how do you ultimately dispose of that data? Where does it live at the end of the day? And as you transgress these different environments, you have to factor that in at each step of the way. So it definitely gets fairly complex, and I think we'll keep seeing that to evolve.
Thank you for your response. I saw Bill off mute next.
Oh yeah, and I'll just jump on top of that. I think there are several things that and now in my current role, I do a lot of engagements, and Brian's right. It has to do with data protection, and I do a GDPR to an extent over in Europe, data ownership. But really, so the short answer is hybrid is the future, right? And it's been proven. Take a note of this. There's a great article by Andreessen and Horowitz, they're a financial consulting firm, they wrote in May, that talks about the cost of data repatriation and all that. It gets into big data. The challenge we run into is, and I was out at a state water agency, 14 petabytes of data. And the concept is that's just too heavy to move, right? I mean, just do this math. If you move 30 terabytes an hour, your 14 petabytes will take 20 days just to move into some other place, right? And that's 13 terabytes. Who has speed of 13 terabytes an hour? So these organizations have massive data sets. And for the most part, there's data gravity where it is. What you want to be able to do is bring your workloads to where the data is, whether that's here, whether that's at the edge, no matter what's happening in the private sector. And the value of a cloud style of computing is your workloads are very lightweight and they can spawn where the data is. So it's much less about now moving everything into a single infrastructure, whether that be a hyperscaler or otherwise, or on-prem. And it's more about leave the data where it is, because a lot of it's very heavy, and spawn your workloads to act on the data. So yes, there's security involved. A lot of our financial institutions want their data local. There's some requirements from when you're working overseas, which the federal government has, state departments in every country, right? There are data protection requirements where you'll be limited what you can do with it. So the easy answer is if you plan your cloud journey from the start to be multi-cloud hybrid, then you're going to be able to handle anything.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. And then Ryan?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different perspective, but I think it's the luxury of being at a small agency as opposed to, being at a large enterprise. I mean, we're one organization that has a small budget, fewer resources. And so our thought process on this is select as few tools and platforms and business processes as possible, and then get really, really good at those. That's not to say that we couldn't do hybrid. I don't know that that's in our roadmap currently. We're looking at pure cloud at the moment, just again, because of the desire to select as few of these platforms and processes and all that as possible. Again, from our baby agency perspective, what I would say though is that regardless of the size of your organization or what your goal is, to define the access path and the critical path and the life cycle of that data, and then to repeat that same life cycle over and over and over and over and over again. I think that is a best practice, unless you absolutely need to deviate, because not only does it allow you and your team to understand more fully what's going on, but it enables users to understand what's going on as well, and where they access what in what way. And that is a real challenge for, at least in government. A lot of folks don't completely understand computers in general, right? And so if I say, well, you log in here versus you log in there, many times that's a really complicated, abstract proposition for them. And so, even when it comes to machine communication, you have to have that path really well defined. But the more that you can replicate the same tools, the same processes, I think that you'll be in better shape.
Great, thank you so much. Casey?
Yeah, and I know this is kind of hits near to my heart. What the USDA has done, because we have a significant legacy. So we have a few data centers across the department. We've integrated an iPaaS solution to help us move the data gravity, as Bill had said, where we need to without having to re-platform all of our capabilities. So we use modern technologies to kind of bridge that gap into our multi-cloud strategy. Because as I said before, we're highly federated, 29 agencies, and we have a lot of data reuse. So we're trying to drive that down and get them into single source of truth. But it's not an easy lift. But we do have lots of high, hundreds of petabytes of data in places that it's not going to move. That's just reality. So what do? Build the plumbing to make it so it can be consumed anywhere.
And our full data set is like 3 terabytes or something like that, just for perspective of how, right, exactly. You guys, and it is laughable, I think, compared to what you guys are dealing with, but, fit for purpose, right? Like for us to go multi-cloud at this juncture doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In the future, possibly, and certainly we have data sharing workloads that go to other agencies and that use all kinds of other systems, so that interoperability is absolutely key. But as Casey and Bill were saying, like if you're dealing with 29 sub-agencies versus one agency that doesn't even have 29 components, then your solution and processes are going to be a bit different.
All right, so moving right along to the next question. What have you seen be successful for consumption-based costing? Where does it make sense for CIOs to pick up costs, and where is it best to delegate, as well as where is the gray area? Casey?
Yeah, this is a great discussion that we have daily, if not hourly, with our customers, because it's a fine line. It's what do we need to provide across the department? And of course, USD is big, so not the same case for everybody. But that's the fine line. How can we enable mission areas to do what they need to and provide that governance and structure at the thinnest layer possible, but also not getting us into trouble, because we are federal agencies. We have a lot of laws we have to comply with. There's a lot of things there that not everybody considers when they go buying cloud and start trying to adopt. And then nobody wants to be on the news on those kinds of discussions. So I think it's you have to make that balance and reuse as much as possible to drive down the unit costs for the consumption based on the customer side.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Brian?
Yeah, no, just like Casey's saying, I mean, I think it really, I hate to say it depends, but it sort of does. It really depends on your mission set and your legal parameters. So in our circumstance, what we generally do is for those things that truly support the enterprise, that multiple organizations just kind of use in the background, we essentially fund that. And then generally speaking, things that are specific to different business units that have different appropriation laws governing their activities, they fund those activities. But in the way we do it, we actually set up our contracts so that those customers can actually fund the contracts directly versus doing a reimbursement, which cuts down a massive amount of overhead. We still have visibility in the spend. Obviously we can still see through the activity monitoring exactly what's happening, and we can offer suggestions and help in terms of reducing costs at a technical level. But really by doing that, we're able to sort of defray some of that management overhead. But there are other areas where I'm going to make a strategic investment in doing that simply so I won't have to go through the costing argument with some customers, right? So it really does depend on where the center of gravity of that initiative lies, and certainly your funding sources as well.
Thank you, Brian. And Bill, I must have missed it, but I just saw that you put a link in the chat to something. Was that in regards to this question or the previous one?
Oh, that was a previous question. There is an interesting, it's kind of a third party. It's really from an investment perspective. Andreessen Horowitz is an investment, and they're trying to help guide people through a newsletter, where to invest and all that. But they just had a very interesting description of cloud journeys. There were a ton of companies went all in back in 2015, closed data centers, and now there's an experience where hybrid is proven out to be more valuable. So again, it's not from a seller guy's perspective. That's an interesting article, highlights a lot of things to think about when you're debating what goes into a hyperscaler, what should you keep on-prem. It's getting to that question of what makes sense for your data, where should your data reside. And I think everything we've said holds true, but that article is just kind of a third party taking a look at what some companies have been through and how they made the decision. So I just recommend, if folks are really interested in figuring out hybrid or all in or none in, that Andreessen Horowitz articles is an interesting read.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And our event team will capture that and share that in the notes as well. So thank you. Okay, so moving right along to the next question. How are you developing the cloud skills of your workforce and enabling them to keep pace with the rapidly changing cloud landscape? So Ryan, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I think there are a couple standard tools in our toolkit that we're implementing now at BIS. So things like setting up lunch and learns, communities of practice, setting aside funding for training and certifications for folks to go out and pursue those things. I do also think it's important to create opportunity to fail. You don't want to fail on the big things, right? You want to scope it out so that if there's a problem, you fail on small things. It's not a huge face plant. But I think that by creating that opportunity, it's like the difference between actually taking guitar lessons and then watching somebody play guitar. It's like, okay, I'm not going to learn how to play guitar by watching somebody play a guitar, right? I'm going to learn by poking around and trying things, and hopefully in a low risk kind of environment. I think in government, at least, people tend to be averse to that because, there's all kinds of security considerations, and I think, and rightfully so, right? But I think everybody's super focused on delivery and serving the public and, not wasting taxpayer dollars and all that. But at the end of the day, that's part of the learning process for anybody. And so, I think it's important to plan for that and, scope out these kinds of sandboxes and development environments and, pilot projects where the risk is low when failure happens, because that's a natural part of the learning journey.
Absolutely. Okay, Brian?
Yeah, no, I echo all that. And I tell you, it was a real challenge in state. I mean, up until about a couple of years ago, we didn't even know who all the developers were in the department. There wasn't like a development community. And as you can imagine, each business unit was very siloed in its activity. It was almost tribal, right? As everyone had different functions. And so what we did a couple of years ago is we set up an application development community, actually held events, brought in guest speakers from industry, other government agencies, and highlighted some of the great work that was happening, in the department. And by doing that, it sort of created this fabric and this communication link. And so we're able to pull people together for similar things, lunch and learns as well. Also, we developed a no-code platform and a low-code platform that folks could use to play around with, sort of as Ryan was saying as well, so that they can get familiar with how technology works in that aspect, so they can go back and learn more. And also providing some actual training, and then also some light consulting expertise from folks that do this when they had time. And by doing that, we started creating this energy and getting folks to really start sharing information with each other. And I think it's helped quite a few teams. And now we're at the point where we're reorganizing, and we're actually going to create a formal organization. And one of the missions in that will be to facilitate modern practices across the department through agile development, coaching, and mentoring and experiential learning. So I think we're getting there, but we got a long way to go. And it's a very interesting and challenging problem.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next question is, can the panelists provide some feedback regarding existing limitations or challenges to overcome as they deployed AI and ML in their hybrid cloud strategies? So any experience with that from our panel?
All right, I'll jump on that. In my current role, I don't meet with any senior leaders in government that don't want to talk about AI ML. It's a big deal in the U.S. government. We had our National Security Committee on AI release a report this past spring, a short 789-page read if you haven't read it. But it's pretty directive and informing the U.S. government that there's things we got to do to keep pace in AI. So everybody that I talk to wants to have a conversation about AI. The challenge, the first of all, it's coming to a common lexicon about what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning, and how does it fit? When we start with it, there's methodologies, and a lot of folks have them about how you have to first start. It's kind of like what Brian was saying about this whole cloud journey. Identify what question you're trying to answer first, right? There's this misunderstanding that if I just add some of that AI stuff to my data, I'm going to have some insight and I'm going to be brilliant. You apply AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning models against data to seek a problem answer, right? So you know what you want to solve by and large. Yes, there is convolutional neural networking that comes up with insights like how to win Go when no one would have thought about it. But let's stay out of that realm of reality. The AI and machine learning has the ability to help you discern valuable information from your data, but you really got to know what you're asking for. So that's the first hard problem. When we walk in, first of all, the data's got to be clean and valuable. That's the biggest hard part, right? And look, I spent my time there, right? We thought it was brilliant in 1980 to put everything on microfiche, right? And so now we've got this stack of microfiche that nobody can read, right? Because how valuable is the data on a microfiche? But boy, did we save some. So those are kind of some historical problems we're having to overcome, because now the Department of Labor wants to go through hundreds of years of, okay, we can't do that economic trend analysis of labor when you're sitting on microfiche. So there's this burden of making your data ready. That is hard, and it takes a lot of time and effort that nobody really wants to do. Somebody wants a magic wand. But then once you do that, it is back to the same conversation Brian was talking about. What are you trying to solve? And then there's methodologies to bring it. And so there it's a lack of skills. There's technical debt involved in this, kind of what Ryan was saying. Bring people into the conversation that have done this. There's a lot of academic institutions doing a lot of this work. Hey, the National Science Foundation funded $800 and something million of R&D last year in your higher education institutions for AI R&D. There's talent out there. You got to bring the right folks into the conversation that can help you, but it's getting your data ready, understanding what you're trying to solve, and then creating a model is not the hardest thing in the world, but operationalizing that model, moving from model development to launching it into the real world where it's providing that value. That again goes back to organizational readiness and culture readiness. So not sure if I really got to it. We can certainly have a deeper dive conversation. We should all be talking about getting our data ready for AI, and we should all be talking about some simple AI steps to take, because it's really not that. There's a lot of tools out there today. You can buy AI platform tools that will do a lot of this for you. But the first thing is you better have your data ready, and it better be accessible. To Casey's point, it doesn't matter where it is. You just be able to get to it to start doing your learning from it. So hope that helps.
Yeah, sounds like our next webinar topic we should have.
Yes.
Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore what Bill is saying, I think that there's a lot of unknowns, and that makes people really uncertain. And so to the extent that you can define what you're trying to do with AI, I think is important. One of the things that we've also had success with is leveraging low code, no code, and here's my coworker here, excuse me. Leveraging low code, no code tool sets that enable people to have a more intuitive experience with artificial intelligence. So for example, you're not just going into something that would require, massive investments in learning, or, a degree in artificial intelligence and development, but using some of these tools that you may already have that have AI capabilities. You can put together pilots and, just buy a handful of licenses and just see what some of the more forward-thinking people in your organization come up with, and use that as the starting point, because it's one of those things that, did anybody study AI in school 20 years ago? I mean, I don't think that was even remotely an option. So the number of opportunities that you can create for folks to just experiment in a frictionless way, particularly through low code, no code tools, I think will help at least inform where you go next and start sort of defining the maturity path there.
And in no way am I going to send some endorsement. I don't want to tick anybody off, but I'll just give you, for folks that really want to kind of dive into this, there's several folks out there, and I'm We work with all of them, but C3.ai has a development platform, C3.ai, look them up, they're great. Modzy, M-O-D-Z-Y. Modzy is a platform that has AI tools baked in for computer vision, signals intelligence, et cetera. That's a platform you can buy, rent, lease, license. Another one out there is called, it's out of Booz Allen Hamilton, Precog. It's kind of based on precognition, but they have a package called Precog. So I encourage you to, a lot of these are getting to that no code, low code you keep hearing the panelists talk about. And these companies are putting a ton of effort into making these AI platforms very usable, but they're going to expect you to have data that's usable. And that's where we trip up ourselves a lot in the federal government with our microfiche.
So this next question, Casey, is for you. How has USDA approached organizational culture to garner support at the department-wide level?
We're not, I don't say this is like solved. This is a fluid environment for us. But what we've done is reach out and find across our partners within the department that are trying to make these kinds of efforts at the grassroots level and start building up some momentum. And that's when we started developing our working groups. And now we're moving from our cloud working groups into like communities of practice on focus areas so we can get down into the technical engineering, data scientist level to help really actualize some of these changes and then use that as a feedback mechanism on where do we need to make changes at the leadership level to help us continue to enable the workforce to deliver the needs we have. It's kind of a similar process. We're doing IT workforce enhancement, same kind of methodology, finding out where are the gaps, what are the things they don't know how to do. So that way we can start targeting, those are the gaps and the skill sets we need to start addressing at the department.
Great, thank you, Casey. Okay, what do our panelists, what do you all think of the status of SASE, Secure Access Service Edge? And we can go back to that one.
Let me just talk about frameworks in general, and I don't have a direct feed on implementing Gartner's framework here. It's Secure Access Service Edge is a Gartner framework, a recommendation for creating a security framework inside a hyperscaler kind of cloud infrastructure environment. And it's just a methodology. You know, there's a ton of zero trust. I mean, you can't swing a dead cat around DC without having someone say zero trust to you. But this is a zero trust framework for the idea where you're basing your zero trust security in a cloud environment to help you do what you've heard all the panelists talk about. Brian talked about role-based access, authentication-based access control, role-based access control, all those things. The challenge is how do you affect zero trust when you're sitting in a hyperscaler cloud environment? And that's a methodology to do. It's not the only one out there. I can't grade it. I haven't dove into it, but I'm sure it is a framework you could then use and build your organization's cloud strategy to secure from the cloud out to the edge. So that's where it fits, but I can't tell you if it's good or not. I'm not going to make that assessment.
Great, thank you. And Raymond, if you want to clarify your question a little more, we can come back to it. But thank you, Bill, for answering that one. Next is, what is the differentiator within the agencies that determine whether a FedRAMP commercial cloud like GCP is acceptable or something like GovCloud is required? Brian?
Yeah, I get this question all the time. Yeah, obviously every agency has its own risk tolerance. I tell you the sort of dirty little secret that's just evolved over time is that, you know, in terms of looking at especially IaaS providers, if they're basically FedRAMP compliant to the same level in a commercial versus a government offering, they're using the same controls. So the reality is, and it was different a few years ago, but at this point in time, it's really normalized. And so really, as long as that FedRAMP compliant level meets your risk tolerance or meets the requirement for your level of data classification, then you should use that. The benefit of having the commercial offerings in general is the different offerings in those environments come to market faster than in the government space because there's a larger client base. And also it's generally a little cheaper because, they have that larger portfolio to spread costs against. In terms of the Gov Cloud piece, I mean, obviously, if you're talking about high side classified, then that's the only game in town. But if you're talking about unclassified space, it really is not much of a differentiator. And oftentimes you'll find that, I mean, everything's logically separated in the cloud, so it doesn't. I don't often understand the risk folks are concerned about from just a practical standpoint. But yeah, for us, we require that all enterprise capabilities have FedRAMP compliance, with the exception of things that are obviously publicly discoverable. I mean, we're not going to FedRAMP, a social media platform, for instance. But anything that's managing government data, we do that so that we can take advantage of that 3PAO attestation. It saves a lot of monitoring costs and a lot of complexity. And that's something that has really helped us out quite a bit to accelerate our ATOs and our compliance activities.
Mhm. So then her second question too is FedRAMP absolutely required for all Fed agencies, or other requirements like NIST 800-53 also acceptable? And are you saying that yes, that is the case, or no, that is not the case?
What I'm saying is that it's based on the security requirements of your data and your activity.
Okay.
Right. So there isn't like a one size fits all. It depends on what it is you're trying to do. Because if you have, say, a public website that you're offering that data to the public, you're not necessarily trying to secure that data from the public. You're making it available, right? So you really have to understand the requirements that data source has and that business activity when you start making those decisions.
Okay.
I'd add on to that it back to risk appetite, as Brian was saying, and your ability and how much you want to take on yourself. He highlighted how much easier his RMF ATO package is when he can start with a FedRAMP product. But I happen to know, that would remain nameless, federal organizations, agencies that are operating in a commercial cloud environment, but they themselves take on the burden of achieving all of the security required themselves. And that's it's back to what risk you're willing to accept and how much burden you want to take on yourself. So to answer your question, is it absolutely undeniably required? It's up to your accrediting authority. Who is going to take the risk? I will tell you, 99% of the federal agencies I deal with will start with FedRAMP because it makes the world so much easier. But that doesn't mean there aren't a couple out there that are alone and unafraid, running around in a commercial cloud, but they're taking that on themselves, and they're paying the expense of monitoring and all the other things that come with that. So that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and if I could just clarify real quick, I was answering that in the context of a commercial versus a Gov Cloud offering, but both being FedRAMP compliant, just to clarify that, because we run into that quite a bit. That was the crux of my comment.
Yeah, and just to put a bow on this, we're actually going through exactly this right now, deciding what cloud to move into. Do we do moderate? Do we do high? Is high commercial versus high government? What does that look like? And at the end of the day, given that we wanted to select one, and that our thought process is that having multiple clouds at this juncture in our journey is going to cause more problems than having than having just one to focus on and get really good at. The thought process is we're moving to a GCC high, government high environment, and that's that. We have partners that operate at that level too. So anytime we want to bring in their data for analysis and merging that sort of thing, we're going to need to provide a similar level of security, and looking to FedRAMP to do that and fill in the gaps for those controls. And in fact, there is a component of our tech stack that we're looking to bring in that's currently FedRAMP moderate, and we're actually starting from that to work with that vendor to get them to FedRAMP high. So to answer your question, there are other ways of doing security, and your CIO could, unless it's legally prohibited, just say, yep, I accept all risk without doing any of the security documentation. Like, they could do that in a lot of cases. But I think, other than the fact that they won't, the fact is that FedRAMP has really become almost like a brand unto itself, and that if something has been stamped by FedRAMP, that it's going to get you 80% of where you need to go, and then you just got to run it into the end zone from there. So, yeah.
Great, thank you all so much. Next question, will there be a replay of this webinar that the attendees have access to? Absolutely. Go to YouTube, type in ATARC, and you will see all of our recordings there. And we have a playlist for our webinars specifically. So that's where you'll find it. Go subscribe to our channel. Just had to put that little plug in there. So this may be our last question because we're almost out of time. But would our panelists, any of you all generally identify and discuss which or what programs have been successful in your offices? So if there's any specific program you'd like to do a call out for. Shelley's curious. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, we don't necessarily look at it so much as programs as services and capabilities, but certainly I'd say our shared responsibility model in our multi-cloud offering has been incredibly successful. Basically, what we do is offer, on top of the CSP controls from FedRAMP, we offer additional wrapper controls, if you will, access to a single identity provider, monitoring and additional controls and provisioning around that environment. In the APaaS environment, or multiple APaaS and SaaS environments we actually manage the pipeline for promoting code. So we have daily product releases. So by making these things certainly more technically feasible for folks to use, having enterprise license vehicles for folks to get access to, and having all the security in place on that, it really reduces the amount of time it takes to get to market. They don't have to get their own contract. They don't need a full ATO, they need a partial ATO, and in some circumstances, they can ride on our ATO in an APaaS environment, just own their data. And so by doing that, we're able to save, approximately $2.5 million a year per O&M and security team per platform that would have to happen otherwise. So that's by using automation and infrastructure as code. So it really is a significant difference, but that requires a culture where you can build the trust that you as the provider will provide a certain amount of capability, and that that'll be useful to the application owner or the workload owner. And that's taken us a couple of years to get there, and we've got over 100 apps in those various environments. It's been very successful, and it's growing every day. And I think for more federated, larger agencies, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I love what Ryan was saying about the small agency piece. He's so right. I mean, if you don't have to go to multi-cloud, that's great. For us, we have so much complexity in our business that we'd bend ourselves in a knot trying to make one fit all purposes. But I think overall that's been really transformational in our ability to get more things in the cloud.
And Ryan?
Yeah, I can give you a very real world example. So I used to work for the Small Business Administration for 5 years, since 2016. And obviously SBA is known now for the COVID relief programs, PPP, EIDL, all of that. That would not straight up have been possible in 2016. I would say that we barely survived COVID by the skin of our teeth. And that was because of the investments that were made in cloud, in scalability, in security, in low code, no code solutions. We were able to go from 4,000 or 5,000 employees and contractors total to basically 20,000 overnight. We were able to put out the entire lifetime of the disaster relief program, the EIDL program. That program is 60 years old. We put out more money in a year for COVID support than we had previously. And again, I mentioned that, like, was everything a success? No, it depends on how you define success, right? But the fact that it existed just straight up would not have occurred. So there are a number of things, customer service, I mean, you name it. The scalability and the investments that were made from like 2016 to 2017 onward is what enabled the agency to survive and for the COVID programs to exist in the form that they were in.
Well, thank you all for your responses to those questions. We are going to pop up our third poll question real quickly so that we can get those CPE credits. In your opinion, how important are emerging technologies to modernizing the cloud? So for those online, please go ahead and answer it. And we'll just go around 30 seconds or less. What do you want to leave our audience with as we come to the conclusion of this webinar discussion? Brian, let's start with you, please.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. I tell you, I think, just as a final takeaway, really think about what it is you're trying to achieve with your modernization effort. And every culture and every organization is a little different, but really approach it. Don't be afraid to take on hard problems, but take them a piece at a time. Don't take them all at once. And reach out to folks that can help you in industry and in other government agencies, folks that have similar challenges, and don't be afraid to share information so that everybody can get across the finish line.
Great. Casey, what would you like to leave our audience with?
I'd really echo what Brian said. And I'd really like to get the federal government to starting to operate more as a community of practice and share our experiences and leverage capabilities and technologies that we have across the federal government to improve service delivery, because we're solving very similar problems. We should start with an 80% solution where we can.
Great. And Ryan?
Yeah, I would echo the points that Casey and Brian made, and in particular, having that grand vision, as long as it's clear, is wonderful. But starting minuscule, starting small, enabling the chance to learn, the chance to fail. I think that's absolutely crucial, because if you stay on that path, you will get there eventually. And keeping the faith is probably another important thing to do, because it can take a long time, and you'll encounter a lot of setbacks. But if you have a clear vision, I think you'll be able to stick on that journey as long as it needs to take you to get to where you want to be.
I love it. And Bill, we will end with you, sir.
Look at that. So my guidance, both from my federal time and now where I'm sitting now, is it is a journey we all need to do. I mean, to push it off is not the right answer. Highlighting everything we've said today, your data is key. Understanding where your data is and how to get to it, and all the securities around that is key. Start with your applications. When I walk into an organization now, it starts with applications. What applications do you have? Do an inventory, and then to Ryan's point, small victories. Pick an application you know that you can clouditize and get success to then demonstrate that value. Don't boil the ocean with this cloud effort. Inventory your applications, identify those that can be that are cloud ready or can be made cloud ready through refactoring quickest, and then bring your workforce with you. The reality is your workforce is the key. So educate your workforce, give them time during their workday to get their skills and their accreditations up, and lean on them. But it's a journey everyone needs to start. There's a lot of resources out there on the Cloud Native Computing Foundation website. They've got an interactive roadmap to help organizations step through the process of moving. There's a GSA publication you can look up that the government published about application rationalization. It's a 6-step process, right? Hi, I'm Bill. I'm on step 6. So look at the GSA 6-step process for application rationalization. And you'll get there, but early victories are key to building momentum in the organization. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. It has been a pleasure, and I want to thank our partners again at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and you all at home for joining us. We had an amazing discussion because you guys sent your questions in, and I think we covered a lot of ground, like Brian said. So we hope to see you all again at ATARC's next event on Tuesday, February 8th. You can see it right there on the screen. And before logging off, please remember to answer this final poll question of how you would like to receive your CPE credit certification. So make sure to fill that out, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. See you next time. Bye.